Hello, everybody, and welcome to the General Eclectic Podcast with Rod Rear. I'm your host, Cale Zeldin, and we are back at it this week. Rod, you're back fresh from a big trip. Where you been, man?
Yeah, I just got in a couple hours ago. I have been in Turkey, in southwestern Turkey precisely. I went on a press trip with some other American journalists. We went to see the 7 churches of the Book of Revelation. For those who don't know, the Book of Revelation starts with very short letters to 7 of the Christian churches in Asia Minor. And it was written around, I think, toward the end of the first century. And let's see, there was Smyrna, Ephesus, Laodicea, Thyatira, Sardis, and Philadelphia.
Yep.
Was there one more?
Pergamum.
Yeah. So we went to all of these. And I got to tell you, it made the Bible come alive for me like nothing other than the Holy Land. It was incredible. And not just the Bible, but the classical world.
Yeah.
And it made me think much more intensely about the kind of stuff you and I talk about all the time. And let me explain what I mean.
Yeah.
I had no idea what to expect. And it turns out that most of these cities, there are actual ruins there. Ephesus was by far the most impressive. It, most people have heard, if you're a Christian, of St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians.
Right.
Well, Ephesus was a really big deal city. It was one of the most prominent cities of Roman Asia Minor. We went to the ruins there, and it just, I don't know, Cale, if you've ever been to an ancient city to see ruins other than Rome.
Yeah, Rome is the only ancient city that I've been to.
Same here. Archaeologists have been working on this stuff for decades. But you go there, and there's still columns standing, and there's still, it's an entire universe. We had a really good guide who showed us different things, and it immersed us in the world of the early church. And it turns out, that we saw the library, the facade of the library of Celsus, which was the 3rd biggest library in the ancient world behind Alexandria and Pergamum. It's there. You can walk in. And is
there anything there?
No, it's just a facade. All that I think there's a grave there. But we got to go at one point. We were walking down the main street there, one of the main streets, and we go to the arena, this gorgeous big amphitheater. That is the very amphitheater where Acts 19 takes place.
Wow.
I stood there on the stage and recited aloud Acts 19. That's a scene where St. Paul is in Ephesus, and there's a silversmith named Demetrius. He's all mad because the preaching of these Christian evangelists is going to hurt their business. Because it turns out Artemis was the big goddess of that whole region, and Ephesus was where the Artemis of Ephesus was the goddess of all goddesses, more than Athena in that region.
Yeah.
So Demetrius starts trying to wind people up, his fellow silversmiths up, saying, listen, we make little silver trinkets for people to take to the temple. If this guy keeps going on, this Christian guy, if they keep going on, they're going to put us out of business. So this riot broke out, and they all go to the theater, and they're just screaming, and they chant for 2 hours or so, 2 hours. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And St. Paul wants to go there and talk to them, but they persuade him, don't do it.
Is this the moment? I think Barnabas sort of, as Barnabas tends to do, right? He sort of steps in. He's like, really?
I don't want to
do it. Good idea. Is this what we should be doing right now, Paul?
Anyway, but I was there, and you could imagine it all happening. And that was the first time. That was the first place we went on this trip, and that was the first time I realized what a total threat the early church was to the established order. We all know that they were persecuted by the Romans, but I began to understand why. Our guide was telling us about the cult of Artemis was just massive in Ephesus. Right. And here comes the Christians, and they wouldn't worship her. You won't worship our goddess? What kind of traitors are you? And moreover, the Jews wouldn't do it either, but the Jews weren't proselytizers. The Christians were proselytizing. And the more they preached, the more converts came to them. it was going to upend the whole economic and social order, which is built around the temple. So I came to understand why the Romans felt the way they did. Certainly it wasn't right, but it also made me think, Cale, that, you and I talk a lot about how we are moving in post-Christian America to a time when faithful Christians are going to be persecuted. It's already starting, but it's going to get a lot worse. And I began to understand too why the whole book of Revelation, including the letters of the seven churches, are all about encouraging the Christians there. Stand firm. You cannot compromise with these people. You might even have to pay for it with your life. But it was just breathtaking. Then we went to the far edge of the city, and we went into the Church of Mary, where the Council of Ephesus was held. That it was the one that declared Mary to be the Theotokos.
Right.
It was really about a Christology council, and where the Nestorians were defeated. And you're walking around there, and it's like, wait, it happened here. This is the spot. I even picked up a little fragment of marble from the fallen walls there, so I could say I have a piece of that church.
So what do you make of that impulse that we have to walking and sort of running your hands into the earth and just being in this place where something happened, and wanting some kind of token or item, a connection to it,
a souvenir.
What do you make of that?
Well, I can't just separate it in myself from the fact that I'm a Christian.
Well, no, I know. Yeah, I'm not asking you to.
Oh, no, I know you're not. But I'm just saying that for me, it's not just a souvenir. This is part of our story, my story, your story, the story of every Christian. A big part of it took place in that ruined church. I went in. You can still see the baptistry there. There's a little a shallow well in the ground where people were baptized in this church. And I went and stood at it and thought about all the Christians and this was built in the patristic era who rose out of that thing. And I mean, it really made me feel so close to the communion of saints, you know. And there was a guy on the trip, an American Pentecostal journalist who just didn't get any of this. He was kind of.
What do you mean he didn't get any of this?
He couldn't understand. He seemed to have the view that the early church, they were all basically 21st century American Pentecostals. I'm serious. And I tried talking to him about this stuff, and he wouldn't listen. He had this fixed idea that this is how it was. And there was an evangelical journalist who's really experienced. She was on the trip, and she was trying to explain to him in language he could better understand that, dude, it's not like that. The early church was, but the guy could not wrap his mind around it. And he thought that the early church was died out because it was in Ephesus. It died there because they wouldn't innovate. Like,
Wow.
No. I said, do you know that there was a church here in around Ephesus until the 1923, when in the wake of World War I, the Greeks and the Turks had massive population exchanges. Up until that time, there were 3 times as many Greek Christians in Ephesus as there were Turkish Muslims. But anyway, I think, but the reason I bring it up is not to crack on him, but to say, my God, we Americans are ignorant.
Well, I for me, a very monumental moment in my own growth as a person and certainly as a Christian was going to Europe for the first time and going to Rome in particular, and walking into St. Peter's really, and my entire worldview. I realized at that point, again, I couldn't articulate it exactly, but you sort of had this immediate intuitive flash that I had spent the entirety of my lifetime and in my mental spaces in a really, really shallow place. place.
Sure.
Shallow.
And you were
both in
Catholic.
terms of,
You weren't an American Pentecostal. Yeah.
Yeah, right. In that, and but we've talked about this before. I mean, I grew up in kind of, suburbia,
Sure.
suburban church and all of that. And I just realized that the extent of my history probably maybe went back to World War II, right?
Yeah.
Just sort of, roughly in my head.
Same.
And I was immediately flooded with the profundity of time. That you could go backwards, right? That I was a Christian because my parents presented me for baptism, and a priest, performed the sacrament because someone had performed a sacrament on him, and somebody had performed a sacrament on him, and you can kind of go all the way back.
Right.
You can go all the way back to one of the apostles, like actually, literally,
No, you can't.
that there's an unbroken succession of people laying hands, Christians laying hands and consecrating the next generations through the sacraments, etc. And I just remember thinking, like, my gosh, I thought, the Civil War was old. And again, for a kid born in 1973, it was, pretty old. But not old like Europe old.
No,
right.
no.
And then you sort of throw on top of it. I remember, I was fortunate enough, when I was in Rome in 1993 for the first time, we did the whole, all of Rome that was above ground, right? And, we would go into the Forum and we would see things, and that was really cool. And I think I told the story before, but I remember being in church at the neighborhood church. It was Santa Maria in Trastevere, and I was just on a church there on a Sunday. You're there, and I'm following along with the mass. It's in Italian, but I know it enough, like kind of what you're doing right now, I'm sure. And I look to the columns to the left of me. I'm literally I'm sitting right next to this column, and my teacher had told us the day or two before that they were from the Roman Forum, and I was like, man, so that column that was repurposed, taken from the Forum and used to erect this church on one of the original meeting spots for Christians in Rome. So we're going all the way back.
Yeah.
Those columns are older than Jesus. You're like, well, that's pretty old.
Yeah.
And then I went to the Scavi tour, right? And
What's
the Scavi tour. So if you've ever seen St. Peter's, like now, like modern day St. Peter's, they've got that huge sort of 4-columned twisted
the baldacchino,
baldacchino, right? And it sits right on top, under the altars, right below that, and right below that, 25, I don't know, maybe 50 feet down, they've dug and excavated, and they've found the grave of St. Peter. And, it's like in those kind of moments where you're like, this is so much older and more profound than anything, that's going on in the International Herald Tribune or on Twitter or whatever it is. It really, and then just the profundity of the incarnation, right? That the scandal that God, the creator of the divine, the creator of the universe, enters into time. And this is not an idea, right? Like Jesus walks the earth, right? And then affects Peter and Paul and Andrew, James and John and all the apostles, and you're walking around. Now in this trip, what always blows me away is that you're literally walking like, this is where Paul hung out.
Yeah, the same, putting your feet on the same paving stones as Paul and Barnabas and all of them. We also went, this was so interesting too. If you read in the Bible and in Acts and some of the letters, lots of very, very harsh discussion of the Jews. Well, we went to Sardis, one of the 7 churches, the remains of Sardis, and there's still, I should say, by the way, that there's still so much to be excavated. Right. A lot of this stuff was totally underground, but the Turkish government, in collaboration with like American and European universities, they're digging it all out.
Amazing.
And we went to the synagogue in Sardis. It's massive. There was a really big Jewish community in Sardis, and it helped me understand more the sense of threat that the Jewish communities felt from these early churches, because so many of the converts were Jewish
Right,
themselves.
it was all Jewish. Yeah.
And, I'm not defending what the Jews said about the early Christians, who thought the early Christians thought, no, we're the real Jews.
Yeah, they're like the
We
fulfilled
accepted-
Jews. Yeah,
we accepted
totally.
the Messiah.
Totally.
But they were winning a lot of converts from the Jewish community, and it threatened the integrity of the Jewish community. I guess what I'm saying is that it helped me understand how radical Christianity was in the world into which it appeared.
Yeah.
It overturned everything. And it helped me also understand in our time
Hmm.
how Christians who stick with what the Bible says and with what our tradition teaches us puts us in radical opposition to this post-Christian world. And so then when we left Sardis,
Wow.
we went out to Pergamum, which was the Roman administrative town of the city of the Asia Minor. And if in the book of Revelation, Jesus says through St. John to the church at Pergamum, he goes, "I know that you are dwelling where the throne of Satan is." Like, what in the world does that mean? Well,
That's strong.
Yeah. Well, you go to Pergamum, and up on there's a big hill where the temples all were, and they had a temple to Trajan that was a later temple there. But the throne of Satan is believed to have been the Zeus altar. There was a big altar to Zeus overlooking what it would have been the lower city, and it's a magnificent place. The whole temple was taken by the Germans, and it's now sits in the Pergamum Museum in Berlin. But you can see the base of it there. And I was doing some reading as we were doing this. What Jesus meant by the throne of Satan is for the early Christians, Rome, the Roman Empire was the instrument of the devil.
Sure.
And not only was the worship of false gods satanic, according to the early Christians, but the fact that at Pergamum, that is where that was a Roman administrative capital. It's from there that they required people to do emperor worship.
Right.
And to walk around on top of that hill and to see all what's left of the temples, temple to Artemis and so on, it's just breathtaking. And again, we realize that when you read on in the book of Revelation, how in his wild vision, John saw that people were not able to buy or sell if they didn't get the mark of the beast. Well, right there in Pergamum, that's where the Roman governors decided that no, we're going to kill you. You if you don't worship the emperor, we're going to kill you. And that was the mark of the beast. In other words, you had to, if you want to participate in the economy, if you want to save your life, you had to worship the emperor. And what I learned, Cale, was that the Roman Empire was incredibly diverse, and the only way they could hold it together was, aside from force of law, was by a common religion, and that religion was emperor worship. And they didn't care if you worshiped other gods too. They encouraged that. They all did that too. Right. But you had to add in emperor worship, and that was no problem for most of the Roman imperial subjects, because the way paganism worked back then, you could, people had their pantheon of gods, and if the Christians had just said, "Oh yeah, you'll add Jesus to that," they would have had no problem. But they were monotheist. They could not do that. And again, that was where all the hatred came from. Go ahead.
Why were the Christians evangelistic in a way in which the Jews were not?
Well, because the Judaism is not evangelistic now. I mean, Judaism is a religion of the tribe, and the Romans figured out that if they wanted to, I mean, the Jews were ornery. I mean, I think to their credit, they weren't going to submit to these pagan gods, but the Romans figured out that, the Jews could actually be a real help to the empire if they could be tolerated. And so they gave them special privileges to, like, all right, you don't have to do this, but they just kept to themselves. They didn't try to convert people. Christians did, because Christianity is like Islam is a universalist religion, want to bring everybody in. But man, being on top of Pergamum and realizing uh, what was decided there and how how pressured the Christians were, and then we ended up going over to Laodicea. Well, before we went on the way to Laodicea, which is the only one of the seven churches in Revelation that Jesus just blasts. And he calls them lukewarm. That we all know that.
Oh yes, of course.
It's them. Yeah. It's them. They were really rich. But on the way there, we stopped at Colossae. Colossae, is that how you say it? Where the Colossians were. They're just about to start excavating. You look out across this field and you see a few rocks here and there. There's an entire city under there.
That's just crazy.
I know. And then we go up to Laodicea. My colleague, this evangelical journalist who was with us, her jaw hit the ground when she saw it. She said, I was last here in 2000. There was nothing here, just a field, a few rocks here and there. But now an entire city has emerged. And, we went through there and it was, again, same thing, man. You just put yourself back in that world. And this was what they all had to live with.
I'm struck, as you're sort of recounting this for us, that, in my own sort of thinking, I go back and forth between, the sort of the concreteness of the real. And then also I have this other tendency to sort of extract out patterns and laws, or whatever. Patterns is really the way that I always think of it, that you can abstract out and take a look at it. So, you can sort of say, you don't want to be like the Laodiceans, let's say, right? Yeah. Lukewarm, right? But what is such a potent reminder for us Christians is that, it's not just an idea, right? It's an actual thing, right? It's taken from a real thing. And like there were real Laodiceans. And so, I don't know. It's an interesting element of our faith, isn't it?
Yeah, they were the church of the seven, who that Jesus condemned totally because they couldn't decide which way they wanted to go. Do you want to conform? Do you not? And all that.
And boy, doesn't that sound? I mean, that sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? Right? Well, I mean, the reasonable accommodations that we make with the regnum.
You got it. And this is the theme that really came out to me over all these travels is that not only was the book of Revelation, including these seven letters, written for those churches, it's written for us too.
Right.
And I don't mean that in like a TV evangelist. Jesus is coming back next. Right. I don't mean it like that. I mean it in that, although he might. I mean it in the
that's
sense,
possible, but
I mean it in the sense that for the first time since those days, first time since Constantine in the West at least, we are living at a time when those Christians who are faithful to what we have been given are now marginalized and hated, and the persecution is beginning, and it's gonna get worse. This is what my work has been about.
So what do you say to the guys who will come at you and be like, "Oh, come on, Roger, you're talking about an infinitesimally small, little mini slice, thin slice of the population, and it's always, the sky's always falling in Drearland." I mean, what gives you a certain amount of confidence that that's cope?
Yeah, well, I mean, look around us. Look what's happening. Look at how people who oppose the empire on LGBT stuff primarily, and every Christian who is going to be faithful to what we've been given in Scripture and in our traditions, in our authoritative traditions, you cannot reconcile it. You just can't. And now, I mean, just while I was on this trip, the Supreme Court heard this case in which a Christian web designer refused to do a website for a gay couple marrying. It's gone to the Supreme Court. While I was on this trip, Tish Harris Warren, who is a friend of mine, and
she's an Episcopalian.
Yeah, not an Episcopalian. She's one of the breakaway Anglicans, but they accept women priests.
Yep.
She's a columnist has a regular column in the New York Times. Tish we have our theological disagreements, but I love her and respect her. She is the epitome of winsomeness.
Right.
And yet, so she wrote a column for the Times talking about how we really have to try to figure out how to get along, gays and faithful Christians, because she doesn't believe that, in same-sex marriage either. It was a model of thoughtfulness. She got massacred in the comments. There were 1,000 comments. The Times finally had to shut it down. And it was so weird to read that on the bus traveling between these cities from an era and thinking about an era when Christians were just laid alive, rhetorically and otherwise, for their views. And I'm like, we're going there fast. We went to Hierapolis, which is near Laodicea. St. Paul was there. And that's where they recently discovered the tomb of St. Philip, the apostle.
Right. That's so amazing.
Oh, it is. And I got to stand in front of it. And
wow.
I mean, they recently, like in the last 10 years, discovered it there. He was crucified on a tree, nailed to a tree, that old man. He was an old man. But it's all so real. And I just want to any Christian who's listening to my words now, go get a guide. You need a guide. It just makes it so much easier, but go.
So what does that do? Okay. So, all right. Look, Rod, we know you like to travel and you like to see nice things and all that kind of stuff. Like, why is it what does it do for you as a Christian? I mean, what does it bring home for you?
Well, it is, first of all, it's made me more interested in Scripture. Our evangelical friends really put us Catholics and Orthodox to shame sometimes how much they love Scripture. But the Bible came alive for me. I was reading. I had my Kindle with me, and as I mentioned earlier, I stood there in the very theater in Ephesus where Acts 19 took place, and I read aloud from it. And I read aloud or read to myself all the letters to the churches as we were going there, and it was so vivid. It was like it became 3D. And it also made me realize that I'm responsible. Those people in the communion of saints, those Christians, most of whose names we'll never know, those men and women, they suffered and they died for the faith. And you know how it is whenever there's a patriotic 4th of July or Memorial Day, say that we're free because those soldiers died for us.
Yeah.
Well, we're Christian because those Christians died for us. And that's the overall message too of the book of Revelation. Jesus keeps saying, or Paul keeps saying, not Paul, St. John keeps saying, all these terrible things are going to happen. Get ready for them. You gotta grind down and be ready for them, but don't be afraid because the victory is already won. If you can claim that victory, you too will be a share. You too will win, and that is so hopeful now because we see Christians being ground down, like poor Jack Phillips, the masterpiece cake shop maker, being ground down. That man may lose on this earth as those early Christians did, but ultimately he's going to have a share of victory. I believe that as a matter of faith. I want to also say that we've completed the tour of the 7 churches, and we ended up in the city of Antalya, a big resort city on the Mediterranean coast. And our guide took us to Myra, what's left of Myra, where St. Nicholas was a bishop.
Wow.
We went there on St. Nicholas's feast day.
Yeah, it's just the other day.
Yeah.
That's great. That's
December
great.
6th. And we were hoping to get there. We didn't know if there was going to be a liturgy in his church. You can go to the church that St. Nicholas celebrated the liturgy in. The Turkish government, Turkey is not very good about religious freedom for Christians.
Right.
The Turkish government has not let Orthodox have services there for many years, but every now and then they'll change around. Turns out they did this year, but we got there 15 minutes late, right after it ended. It was fine, but a deacon, when he saw I was Orthodox, he let me come up and reverence the bones of Saint Nicholas.
Yeah.
They had some bones there.
Wow.
Saint Nicholas's bones.
That's
I just
so good.
kissed the reliquary and crossed myself and praised God. They also had their Kale, and they just discovered this like 2 or 3 months ago, the tomb of Saint Nicholas.
Wow.
Of course, his body, or most of his body, is in Bari in Italy, because well, the Great Schism had to happen. Some Italian Christians came over, broke into the tomb, stole his body, and took it to Bari.
Got him.
Yeah.
Well, again, I'm struck hearing your stories here. It's like the overwhelming sense that I'm getting from you is just the realness of it all.
The realness,
and the physicalness of it all. That it's not, and I hate to say this, but it's not just a story.
No.
That it's a and maybe this sort of gives you insight into story, but it's like that is the overwhelming part of it for me. That you walk. You go to these special places. You and I have talked before about certain cathedrals being thin spaces, but the world, right? I mean, I think what you are bringing home to me is that the world is a thin space if you can kind of connect yourself to it. But I'm similarly struck by the fact that none of these ancient churches are working right now, are they?
No.
I mean, so we especially we Americans tend to sort of think that, well, it'll always sort of be this way.
Oh, I see your point.
And it's not true, actually, and in fact, quite the contrary, as you just saw.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I mean, well, we went outside of Sardis, at the edge of Sardis. There are the ruins of a giant temple to Artemis, and right next to it are the ruins of like a 4th century tiny Byzantine church.
Yeah.
Both of which are ruined. Where are the worshipers of Artemis? They faded away. Where are the worshipers of Jesus Christ in that place? They're not there anymore. This is a land of Islam. And I was thinking more than once, looking at these temples to the different pagan gods, about that great Edward Watts book that we talk about from time to time, The Last Pagan Generation, the final pagan generation. I recommend that so strongly. Watts is a historian, and what the book basically does is he goes back and looks at the letters and other writings of 4th century pagan elites, Roman pagan elites. As we now know that the 4th century was the hinge point of Western history. That's when Rome flipped from being pagan, the Roman Empire, from being pagan to being Christian. And Watts found that none of these pagan elites really saw what was happening around them. They could still see, even to the end of the century, pagan temples open. The Christians kept rising and rising. And, oh, wow, Constantine, the emperor, became Christian. But still, they just didn't see what was going on. And I think we Christians are in the same place now. It's really instructive to go there and see that this can happen to us too.
Right. You use the phrase, where are the worshipers of what was the pagan god you brought up?
Artemis.
Artemis, they faded away. And I would probably push back a little bit on that. And I would probably say they didn't fade away. They chose something else. Right. And I'm going to be a little bit of a nudge and kind of insist on that, because I think that, we are attempting to live, we in the West, and perhaps particularly those people who are sort of part of the, whatever, the establishment or the blob or the cathedral, whatever, we sort of believe that we are sort of moving into a post religious time, and I would counter that to say that there is no such thing.
Oh, you're right.
There is no such thing as a post-religious age. All of us, all people at all times live under a myth, right? Not myth as in a falsity, but a myth as a kind of overarching metaphor.
A story that tells us who we are.
That's exactly right. That gives meaning to our experience, right? And so for whatever reason, we humans can't live without myth. And yet we are hearing from our sort of cultural betters that we're finally kind of getting past all myth. And I get most nervous when people start talking in that kind of register, because I don't believe that's a possibility. I think what they've done is that people have convinced themselves that they are post-religious, but they've just changed the object of worship. They've changed the object of liturgy. They've changed the object of their ideal or something like that.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things I was reading on the bus, I was reading books to try to understand this. The scholars were saying, and Bishop N.T. Wright, the Anglican bishop, Tom Wright, who's really popular, and he has a book, and he was saying that idol worship is the central concern of St. John, you know, and it was big in the early church. What was idol worship? It wasn't simply bowing down before the statue of Artemis. It was anything that you put in the place of worshiping the true God.
The true God.
The emperor, your money, sex, anything. And this is where we are today. I mean, the more you read about how more I was reading on this trip about how the early Christians had to struggle really hard as minorities, these overwhelmingly pagan, sensual societies. They had to struggle against idol worship. I'm like, we are there today. I mean, it's you know, and
look, you know, all you have to do is, you know, walk into a room full of people. Like the airport's a perfect example. And what is everybody doing? Everybody's buried in their phones, right? They're looking into the black mirror and they're scrolling and they're scrolling and they're scrolling. This is worship, in a real way. We pretend it's not, right? We pretend we're just connected, but we're worshiping something. You know, and it's you know, God, it's liturgical, like it's rhythmic, it's ordered toward a different goal.
I've got to tell you this too, man.
Go ahead.
This is one of the most important things I personally got from this trip. The reason I went on this trip when they invited me is because I wanted to go to these holy places in doing research for my book on re-enchantment, because I wanted to experience what it's like to be in a place that's so directly connected to the early church. And but as I mentioned, there was a Pentecostal journalist with me, and he and we had some angry words from time to time because he seemed to be so American. He was a nice guy, basically, but he's so American. He seemed to think he knew everything about everything. You couldn't tell him anything. We got into this argument once at lunch. He was talking about how the future of the Christian church is in the metaverse. And he talked about how he pulls his freaking VR headset out.
Wow.
You know, as we're having lunch in I think it was Thyatira or something. Anyway, and he's like, and I said, well, maybe he talked about how meaningful it was to him to worship in the metaverse church. And I said, well, maybe for you, but
I'm sorry. He is in Turkey.
Yeah.
And he straps on an Oculus glasses thing.
Yep, at the table.
And he goes to church in the metaverse.
Well, he didn't go to church there, but
you're kidding me, Roger.
No, he was talking about how in the past he does this. He lives in New York and how meaningful it is to him. And I was trying to be polite. I said, well, you know, maybe for you, but that will never work for Catholics and Orthodox.
Can't, right. He can't because of the Eucharist.
He said, well, you're wrong about that. I'm like, actually, I'm not. And I tried to explain sacramental theology to him. He refused to accept it. Yeah. And it was the reason to bring it up is not so much to crack on him, but the more we had these kind of conversations, the more I realized that this man, and he considers himself a conservative, this man is the epitome of where we are today in American Christianity. I wouldn't even say he's a moralistic therapeutic deist, though he might be. It's just that he's so totally disembodied. We got into an argument on the bus when we were talking about travel and the Holy Land and how meaningful it is to go to the Holy Land. And I said, there's no holier place on earth for Christians than the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
That's not true.
That's what he said. He goes,
Wow.
well, how can you say that? That's totally subjective. I'm a Christian and I don't know that that's like, I said, but that's where God himself, Jesus Christ, the man God,
Walked the earth,
yeah, he did, and
hung
he
on a cross.
within the space of that church, he died and rose from the dead. This guy, he was like, no, no, I mean, he believed it happened, but he's like, well, no, whatever you think is holy is what's holy.
Oh my God.
It could be something else. And like, what, the Oral Roberts University prayer tower? He was totally sincere. And I thought, this is, and I heard him talking to the evangelical. He said, I know what's true based on how I read the Bible, how I interpret the Bible, and what the Holy Spirit says to my heart. And I'm like, oh, here we are. And I tried to explain to him at one point, standing in one of these cities, like, if you don't have, he started cracking on culture, saying, oh, right. Traditions are so vain and they're useless, and that's not Christianity. I said, you can only have Christianity or any religion with culture. Culture is what carries it. There is a reason that God chose the Jewish people to be the salvation to come through the Jews. It matters that Jesus of Nazareth, the God man, was a first century Jew of Roman Palestine, et cetera, et cetera. And it matters that Christianity is what you get when you combine Hebrew religion with some Greek ideas, et cetera. God didn't get any of it. And I could tell he was kind of mad about it because it just wasn't part of his experience. He seemed to feel that whatever he feels at any given moment is the truth. And again, I stress, Cale, he's not a liberal. I mean, he was talking about how in some places in New York where he works, he suffers for being a Christian. And I totally believe him.
I mean, I think it's a real temptation, for American Christians, and again, not to crack on our Protestant brothers and sisters, but I do think it's a tendency that's a little bit more, prone to happen in certain Protestant circles, with this sort of this distrust of tradition. The Protestant tradition, ironically, right? The Protestant tradition is a sort of a break from what they considered the sort of the decadent accumulations of culture over and against the pristine word of God, right? And so that's a sort of a return to sources. And what's interesting, as you and I both know, especially, reading kind of the eccentric church history of Tom Holland, that this back and forth between the sort of the collection of gains and the return to purity is a tension within Christianity itself, right? And but we're on this sort of this multi-100-year bender of pretending that we can exist without tradition. And but if you one of the things I know that Paul Vanderklay always talks about is that one of the traditions of Protestant preaching is that there are these cultures of preaching, right? There are these accumulations of styles and motifs and images and layers that are rich unto themselves. And so then you meet somebody like what you're talking about is that they're blind to their own traditions. They're blind to their own those accumulated modes of being, right? If that's what a culture is, that they're defending something that's just not real.
Right. Well, I told them, I said, your entire way of seeing this is seeing Christianity is that of a 21st century American Pentecostal. And it's just not so for a lot of Christians around the world today, and certainly not for the early church. And he just didn't get it. And this guy's not stupid. But it's just his world is a non-denominational Pentecostal world, and it's just a framework. I mean, Eric Metaxas and I used to be friends. You're the best-selling guy, and he had pretty much the same way of interpreting the world. Whatever the Holy Spirit was saying to his heart. And I really respect Eric. He's Yale educated. He's a smart guy, but that I don't know what the word I'm looking for, that lens through which to see the world. Christianity, if that's what we become, we're doomed. We're not going to
Well,
last.
well, it strikes me it's kind of a simplification device, right? That the world is complicated, the faith is complicated, history's complicated, everything's a mess. Personally, communally, politically, all that sort of stuff. Everything's a mess, right? We know that, and so we need certain um, mechanisms, maybe even technologies, to simplify things so that we can make our way through the world,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
The problem is that you have to always sort of hold a little part of you to recognize that, hey, right now, there is complexity that I'm cutting myself off from a certain amount of complexity because I need to like make my way through the day. Like I need to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
up, make my coffee, go to work, right? I mean, if I
sure.
contemplate all the problems of the world, I can't do that, right? But in order for you that kind of that framing device to be sort of a workable one and a healthy one, you need to always hold out to, hey, I might not be considering every little bit of evidence right now. And so a concern that I have for those kind of simplification devices, those kind of technologies, we jam everything through, is that it's very hijackable, right? You can hijack a kind of oversimplified system, and look, I think religions do this all the time, and religions become fragile and decadent when they lose sight of the fact that they are kind of simplification devices. I'm
Yeah.
sounding heretical. I
No,
know
I know.
that,
I
but
think I know what you're. I think I know what you're saying here. And on the other side, it is certainly possible to lose oneself as a Christian in tradition and ritual and all that, and never let your heart be touched by the living God, the experience of the
right,
living God. And I
right,
think that was something that a Pentecostal can bring to us, and that we
right,
from the older
exactly,
traditions need to
exactly,
see. On the other hand, I mean, I was trying to explain to this guy. I said, "Look, we went to the church, the ruins of the church where the Council of Ephesus was held. That was so important. These church councils. That's the reason we have the Bible today. It's
right,
from these
right, right,
church councils. The Bible you and I both trust."
right.
I still can't understand it. It's like he had this block in his mind that he had decided that everything that took place before 50 years ago, before the Azusa Street,
Yeah, yeah, right,
when
right.
Pentecostals started,
Well,
was was irrelevant.
right.
It's the
Well, look,
weirdest thing.
this is a form. It's a form of modernism, actually. It's a form, it's a kind of form of fundamentalist modernism, a kind of hyper rationality that you can sort of shrink things down. Actually, I've been thinking a lot this morning about McGilchrist and the left hemisphere and right hemisphere. It's a form of kind of creating a kind of overly left hemispheric faith frame so that you can kind of manipulate it and make sense out of it, but it's not being
Mhm,
brought
mhm.
back to the right hemisphere, that the one that sort of contains the whole of a thing, right? And I
Yeah,
think you and I look at this sort of specific and shallow and tightly circumscribed Azusa Street,
yeah.
type faith, and be like, okay, yeah, but you're not placing this into the larger context that out of which it all came,
Yeah.
right?
All right. Here's the thing that I took away, the main lesson for the Reenchantment Project.
Yeah,
Because this guy was on the trip, and I mean this seriously, it really helped me.
I was gonna say
His,
it's a gift. It's a gift to your project for
yeah,
sure.
his Christianity is deeply sincere. He was clearly a sincere guy, but
Mm-hmm.
also totally disembodied,
Mm-hmm.
disconnected from history, disconnected from physicality. It's something he all carries in his head. And that he has no idea how fragile his Christianity is, as fervent as he believes it in his heart. And I tried to tell him, without culture, without ritual, without disciplines, Christianity can't last. And he just couldn't grasp it. But it helped me realize I'm going to need to help readers of my book who tend to think like him. And I think a lot of Americans, Christians do. And
Agreed.
not just charismatics or evangelicals.
Well, Catholics and I'm sure some Orthodox, it's the
Yeah,
same thing. Look, we all live in the modern world, right? I mean,
yeah,
so even if we have sort of have carved out a sort of philosophical space in which we know that, being embodied is important, like it doesn't take away from the fact that we struggle with embodiment. And a lot of the reason we struggle with embodiment is because of the technologies that we have leveraged that have become so powerful and helpful in our world also blind us,
Yeah.
to being, right? That the world doesn't need to be re-enchanted, as you've said before, but we need to be afforded an opportunity to see again.
Well, in one of those letters to the churches of Revelation, Jesus condemns, I think it's the church at Thyatira, condemns it for having given space to this prophetess Jezebel. Jezebel's clearly not the real name, but I may be confusing the churches. There's one of them that is allowing what Tom Wright, N.T. Wright, says. He was explaining what the language there, and they're allowing people to think that they can accept, they can be sexually active, like disobey Christianity's law, sexual teachings, and still be good with God. Just sort of. And what Jesus is saying, and through St. John, is you can't do that. Do not let this into your church. You got to walk the straight edge. And there's an N.T. Wright says in his book, it's called Revelation for Everyone. It's kind of like Revelation for Dummies, but I really appreciated it because God knows I'm not an expert on it.
No,
but,
I know.
Yeah. But I thought, could this possibly be more relevant to us today? Because the early church, they were in such a culture of overwhelming sensuality, pagan sexuality. It was there, the pressures they were under, just to give in, just to assimilate. Really, do you think God would really care about sex? And St. John and Jesus are saying, actually, if you don't do this, you're going to be swallowed up. It's true today.
Yeah, and just because, that part when I said that you were made the image and likeness of God and you're an image bearer, like I meant that, right? And look, it's a profoundly challenging and tough truth, right? To carry the burden, to live with the burden of knowing that you are an image bearer of God is profound. I mean, it's as profound as it gets, but the entire edifice, interestingly enough, but the entire edifice of the world that we inhabit was built on that idea. Now, the word, and now we're I think what you're saying is that we're forgetting that radical fundamental truth that human beings are amphibians, right? That we're a little below the angels and above the animals, right? We're this sort of weird hybrid creature that bears God himself. That's a tough burden to shoulder, I think.
Well, I could go on and on about this trip, and I'll stop here. But I just want to say that it taught me that the Bible is for now, and all these stories that we read, the letter to the Colossians, the Ephesians, and all that. Not only were they to real people struggling in real places, which, we know that abstractly, but it's one thing to know it abstractly. It's another thing to walk in the ruins of the church in Laodicea or to stand in front of the tomb where Philip the Apostle was buried, and to know that all these letters to the churches, they were all being passed around right here at one point in history. And I just had not really thought about the book of Revelation in this way. Of course, we didn't get into all the bizarre symbolism and things like that. You can go there, but that wasn't the point of this trip. The main lesson is times are hard. Times are going to get harder. You got to be willing to suffer to bear witness to the faith. And, that's been my big theme. And
it's interesting because you've been hitting that for the last 6 months at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of the big themes in Live Not by Lies. And, right. And I got to say this too. We were talking. One of the great things is I got to meet some local Turkish people and talk to them. And this one guy spoke English. He said, "Listen," he was being very tentative, asking me. He said, "I got to ask, who is paying for all this transgender stuff?"
That's
to
interesting.
to be popularized. And like, why do you think somebody's paying for it?
Yeah.
This man, a Muslim guy, could not imagine that anybody would actually, other than a few people, would actually choose to believe this stuff. He said somebody has to be doing this. I'm like, let me assure you, yes, you're right. There are a lot of rich people paying for this, but this is what happens when your elite is captured. And then they went on to say that, well, there was a form he was filling out, some intake form for something, I forget what.
Like
And
a
he
government
said,
form or something?
yeah. He said, and they gave you a choice: male, female, non-binary, other. Prefer not to say.
This
I
is
said,
in
wait.
Turkey?
I said, you're a Muslim country governed by an Islamist party. He's like, I know, but the government still let it happen. I said, it's coming here. You're not going to be able to avoid it. And he also talked about what the West did to Qatar over the World Cup, like punishing them for having the views they do on LGBT. And that opened up this huge discussion about Western cultural imperialism and the hypocrisy of the libs.
Well, and I guess what I'm just, I don't even think it's just sort of cultural imperialism. I just think it's, what does it really mean to have a conquering religion, a new myth come with the full weight of technology and economic power?
Yep, and the state.
Right. It reminds me in some kind of interesting way that the state's not even really a state, right?
Yeah.
That the state is ultimately a religious mythos, and it just happens to be a religious mythos with guns and nukes and troops and money, lots and lots of reserve currency, right? So it's a really revelatory, thing when you can kind of step back and see that kind of, that kind of overlay, right?
And you're right back at the Acropolis of Pergamum,
right.
where the state functions and religion. There was a huge library there, so academia in a way.
Yeah.
It was all there on top of that hill, and that is where Jesus said the throne of Satan was. And again, he was talking about this power, this Antichrist power that exists to defy God. And the whole point of these letters was to tell the local people, Christians, I see you're suffering. You're going to have to keep suffering. You're going to ultimately have victory because the victory has been won. But boy, what a lesson for us Christians today.
And that's I guess why I keep going back and forth between these two tensions of your trip, right? As I'm hearing you talk about it, it's like it's so physical and it's so real and it's not, and yet it's so clearly operating at the level of fractals and patterns that that are not new, right? I mean, I think that's what's it's just kind of mind blowing to be reminded of that.
So, what happened while I was away?
Oh, just a few things, I can't believe we didn't even get to the Twitter thing, which is just
no. Let's
all right. Let's do it. So, all right. So, while you're away, Rod, as you may know, Elon Musk purchased Twitter, and a month and a half ago or something like that. And he, of course, when you own the company, you own all of the assets and all of the things
and all the files
and all the files. Right? That's what I mean. Yeah. So you own all the stuff, right? And after lots of sort of gloom and doom on the part of the 75% of the work, the Twitter workforce that was either let go or left, and all of the predictions that Twitter was going to die and that was it, and sayonara and see you on Mastodon, which is some sort of like alternative Twitter. I think it's a version of like Truth Social or whatever. It's an alternate Twitter, but at any rate, it won't work. Twitter's still here. Twitter is still working, and it looks like Musk is attempting some kind of refounding, rebooting, Twitter 2.0 type thing. And we'll see. I mean, I actually, I am not myself a Musk worshiper. I have deep reservations about, for instance, Neuralink.
Yeah, it's transhumanism stuff.
Yeah, I have nothing but respect for what he's done with Tesla and SpaceX, but I'm also deeply skeptical about the costs of the electric vehicle infrastructure. I just don't believe in it. I mean, it works. I know electric cars work, but I don't think that it's actually the boon that it is being heralded as. But anyway, that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about Twitter. And so the other night, remember, Rod, back when we were younger men with dark hair and no gray, there was this thing called Must See TV. And it was like Thursday night. It was like, it was on NBC. Thursday night, it was like Friends and Seinfeld and ER and whatever. It was like, and it was really kind of appointment viewing, and everybody would watch it, everybody I knew, and then we would all talk about it the next day, right? Seinfeld, like, what happened on Seinfeld? Anyway, so we had this kind of moment where Elon Musk conscripted Matt Taibbi, a left of center independent journalist, Substack extraordinaire. Really, I have a decent amount of respect for Matt Taibbi. I think he's an honest guy. I think he's the real deal, and he basically likes that kind of old kind of journalism in which you're kind of trying to stick it to the man. That you're holding power accountable, right?
Yeah, his father was an NBC News journalist.
Yeah, up here, and I think outside of Boston, or in Boston maybe. But at any rate, he is tweeting out all this tweet thread. I forget. I think it was the other night, in which he's sort of laying out actual collusion between the Biden campaign and the Democratic National Committee and the executives of Twitter, suppressing, of course, the now infamous and verified Hunter Biden laptop story, right? And but what's interesting to me about it is that it was immediately attacked by powerful journalist people.
So many liberal journalists, very powerful ones. I did see
all of
this,
them.
yeah.
All of them, that this was a nothing burger, number one. And number two, why would Matt Taibbi be doing PR work for the world's richest man?
That happened over and over. So many journalists use the same verbiage.
Yeah, like it's like, what is it? What do they call it? West Yang always calls it copy pasta. It's like it's just so lazy. But clearly, they do not like this. That this is sort of coming out, right? And then it turns out, I don't know if you saw this little wrinkle into the story. Apparently, Musk then is going to give a second file dump to Barry Weiss, who will also do some kind of, reporting on it. But it turns out that there was a mole inside of Twitter. Did you see this one?
Is this the FBI guy?
Yeah.
Former
Baker.
FBI senior counsel?
Yeah, who was curating the files that Barry Weiss would have access to. Well, anyway, they found out about this, and Elon Musk unhired him. And so anyway, we're expecting this next year. Now, no. What are your take? I mean, like, I know you've been away, but I mean, what are your thoughts?
I had followed a little bit of that on Twitter. And look, this is the theme. It's a revelation. It is an apocalypse. It is an unveiling of how power works in this country.
But Rod. I mean, what? Who cares about Hunter Biden dick pics? I mean, come on, Rod. Yeah. I mean, what? So sordid. I mean, God. I mean, the world. Come on. Why do you care about this, Rod?
Yeah. That's what they're saying. Because what that Hunter Biden laptop thing showed is that the Biden family was up to its eyeballs in corruption, corrupt foreign dealings. And you had the most powerful social media company in America, Twitter, collaborating to keep this news, to suppress this news, so it wouldn't help Trump beat Biden in the race. And it lets you know that we are ruled by a regime. Right. That they are trying to control the narrative. And now here comes Elon Musk, and it seems to me that all he wants to do is make it a little more fair, and they're raising hell. It is the end of the world for them. And my God, who can you trust anymore? That's an evergreen statement these days. But
right. Well, and what strikes me, about it is the what do they used to always say about Nixon, right? It's not the crime, it was the cover up, right? And so what strikes me about this story is that it's not so much the fact that Hunter Biden's laptop exists and it's real, but it's that, and it's not even just that, all of these people suppressed the story. Basically, you couldn't share it on Twitter. You couldn't even share it on Twitter DMs. Like, it was just like, it was literally, and this is from the New York Post. It's not like from some dude's blog, right?
Yeah.
This is not the Drudge Report. Remember back in the day with Monica Lewinsky and all that, right? This is the New York Post, and it was reported out and whatnot. But it's that now, it's that all of this is revealed, right? It's unveiled, as we're riffing on here today, and the collective response to those people who are in charge of informing the public about what's really going on, their reaction to this is to run interference for the cover up.
For the powerful. Yeah.
Right. I it's baffling to me.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. And the part of me that like hurts, it's like, it kind of looks like it's just not going to matter, Rod. They're just going to get away with it.
Yeah.
It's like the world is Chinatown.
Yeah. Forget it, Jake. It's China.
Exactly.
Forget it, Kale. It's Chinatown.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that could be, I think you're probably right. I remember for the longest time, conservatives like me would say, if we just show the libs that you've been unfair here, you're being hypocritical and true to your values, you'll turn around. No, that's not true. They don't care. They honestly don't care. And I just don't know what to say anymore other than that. Part of this too, Cale, and I know we've run over time here, and I don't want to pivot too abruptly, but I've been caught up in this whole thing. We talked about it on the last episode with Thomas Acord, the ex-headmaster of my kid's school, who had a secret online life as a white nationalist. Right. You sent me something this week that you got from one of our listeners, who said that he is seeing around him all of his young white male colleagues. They've become racist and anti-Semites.
I'm gonna read the note real quick.
Yeah, read the note.
So he follows me on Twitter. He said, "Look, just a note to you about your most recent podcast with Rod and the conjuring up of white supremacy. I've noticed that my younger male coworkers are like straight up racist, anti-Semitic white supremacists, like for real. They just came out of college and have been steeped in the anti-white stuff in school their whole lives. I left school, and this is the letter writer. I left school in 2007. I was raised in the 90s. I got the MLK thing too. That's what we were talking about last week, right, Rod? But that shifted right after I left, I think. I don't agree with them, obviously, but like, I get it. If you've been hit over the head with anti-white racism under the guise of DEI for 15 years, like, yeah, obviously, a lot of people are going to be like, okay, well, if this is the game, I'm going to play the game. And he ends his note by simply saying, ugly stuff.
Yeah.
And that one hit me like across the face.
Well, you know what? The first thing that came to mind with me, I was thinking about Thomas Acord after I read that when you sent it to me. Acord is a professing Christian. And because of that, he is grounded in something
above him, over him, right.
He might, and that is going to be the thing that might, please God, pull him out of this pit. But guess what? Our Ross Douthat said so famously a few years ago to the left, if you don't like the religious right, wait till you see the post-religious right. Mm-hmm. The guys your correspondent's talking about, that's the post-religious right. Yeah. That generation doesn't, we all know that the surveys of research has shown that religious faith has collapsed among these people. But they're not it doesn't mean they believe in nothing. They'll be nihilist. Well, a nihilist does believe in nothing, but what I'm saying is they'll believe, if you don't have an ethic, a firm binding ethic that tells you racism is evil, that's evil. Even if the rest of the world is doing it, you can't do it. Then you're going to go for it. It makes perfect sense what these young men are doing. If the world around them has embraced anti-white racism and calls it virtue, then why shouldn't they, as a matter of self-protection, embrace racism? Hear me. I'm not saying this, but I'm saying that without a religious ethic that grounds them, and tells him, "Thou shalt not." This is what we're going to get.
Yeah, I hesitate to say what I'm about to say because it might come across as flippant, but I'm going to quote the great Walter Sobchak from The Big Lebowski. And he says to his friend Donnie and to his friend Lebowski, he says, "Say what you will about the tenets of National Socialism, at least it had an ethos," right? And of course, the joke is absurd, but the idea that, my contention, if I could sort of add a gloss onto that, is that we do have an ethos, right? Having an ethos is not optional. And if you're not going to follow, this spirit, right, you're going to follow another spirit.
Uh-huh.
And what we're seeing, what that note screamed out to me, is that these young men are indeed following another spirit, and it's not a good one.
Right.
You've heard me bang on about this forever. Like, we're not buffered selves. We are porous and we are spirit filled. And it's not just sort of the warm and fuzzy rainbow and unicorn spirits. It's not the sort of the handsome, prayer card spirits that we would see growing up. It's like, there are bad spirits too. And to think that we can operate outside of or beyond or away from a spirit is totally naive. It's totally naive.
In Acts 19, we were talking about it earlier. It took place in the mostly in that theater. But before that episode, still in the same chapter, you have some Jewish exorcists or Jewish religious people who try to exorcise a demon-possessed person there in Ephesus to try to mimic what the apostles are doing. And the demon turns on them and says, Paul, I know. Paul, we know. Jesus, we know. Yeah. But who are you? And then attacks them and chases them away. Well, that same thing's happening now. These people are opening themselves up because to something really dark, both metaphorically and I think literally.
But what vexes me, Rod, is that, like, they're not. There's a sort of structural naivete to their worldview, right? Because they're pretending that stuff doesn't exist, right? And they're pretending that they can sort of affect some kind of neutrality. They can kind of, they're beyond or above or to the left or to the right of all that sort of silly stuff. But like, no, it's quite real.
Yeah.
And when you act ignorantly and unconsciously, you're the most dangerous.
Well, the reason I brought that up is these failed Jewish exorcists in that book of that chapter of Acts, they thought they could control this wild, malignant spirit, and they couldn't, and they got hurt. I think in the same way, when you have the people who run the media, academia, and so forth, when they center and praise people like that Rutgers University black female professor who is saying hideously anti-white racist things, they think they can control this. The people that it's but I have said so many times, you guys are calling forth horrible demons among these white people, like the guys that your correspondent was talking about. Nobody cares. I just do not I can't for the life of me understand, Cale, why the left doesn't see that. I think their experience is a lot like this Pentecostal guy I was talking about. His world is entirely Pentecostal. Right. He has so little experience of the Christian world outside of Pentecostalism that he doesn't know what he doesn't know. Similarly, I think that so many of these elites, most of them white, who platform all this stuff, this garbage, this racist, anti-white racist garbage, their only experience of other white people are white people who hate themselves as much as they do and who won't fight back. And it's just scary because I can see a future for you and me and people like us. We're going to end up having to be like, we may end up having to be like poor Franz Jägerstätter and who in the movie A Hidden Life, true story, the whole village, an entire village of church-going Catholic farmers in Austria, they all went Nazi except for Franz and his family. how did they do it? What did he have? What did he have in his heart? How strong was God in his heart that it gave him the perspective and the courage to do as the first century Christians in Ephesus and Pergamum and all that did, and say, no, I will not submit. Kill me, but I will not submit to this evil.
And that's the spirit, Rod, right? I think that is what, we call upon, right? For inspiration and for strength, is that we have seen, we have witnesses, who have come before and said, no, like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to play ball. Whatever it is you're throwing at me is way less important than what I ultimately have my eyes on, and being grounded in that way, and having, look, these folks in Ephesus had, didn't have the benefit of all of their examples, right? They were new Christians, right? And so, we at least have the benefit of their witness to us. So, but I do think it's where it's going. I think that this is sort of the quick erosion of zones of comfort. Comfort's going away, something like that. So.
And we as in the Christian community, and anybody, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, anybody who doesn't agree with what this new social order and its gods, its idolatrous gods, proclaim, is going to suffer, and you better be ready for it. A lot of people are going to submit. And a lot of people are going to be martyred. If it could be a white martyrdom, like the guy, this professor, psychology professor who edits a prestigious psychology magazine, got fired this past week after he just asked some other psychologists to write critical analysis of a paper they published by a Black psychologist. The Black psychologist said that just criticizing him professionally was racist, and over 1,000 psychologists signed a petition demanding that this editor, a white guy, be fired, and he was.
Cowards.
Cowards. But that's what we call white martyrdom in the sense, not in the racial sense, but in the sense of no blood was shed, but the guys may not even be religious. Religion doesn't come into this.
No, but that's not the point, right? The point is, it's like, I've always remembered, is it the book of Daniel where that all they have to do is sort of put a little pinch of incense on the fire and everything will be fine?
Yeah.
It's like, it's so, like how easy is it to sign a petition? It's a little pinch of incense, right? To ward off the baddies this time, right? It's the "Don't hurt me" sign, it's the greengrocer sign, right? It's all of these versions, and people kid themselves into thinking that they can keep, they can outlast, right? But that's not a strategy. We're not called there. Like, you're called to be great, not to buckle. You can only bend the knee to one thing, right? And that's God himself. And yet, a lot of people will balk at the idea of bending the knee to God, but will bend the knee to, the regime. So it's weird.
And
weird
this
times,
is, we can end on this. And this is, again, the ultimate message of the book of Revelation. I didn't realize this until I took this trip and did a lot of reading on the way, is that you cannot compromise with evil. And even if that means you have to suffer persecution, even give your life, but don't be afraid, because this is a paradox of Christianity. The ultimate victory has already been won, and you can share. Even if you die a victor. And where are all the persecutors of those Christians? And where's Caesar? Where's Artemis? They're all gone. Christianity is still here.
Right.
For now.
There it is. Yeah. Well, we're going to do our best to sort of keep it going so that we can meet our God. All right. Well, Rod, this has been good. A little bit longer than we usually go, but I'm glad we got a good feedback on your trip and these other sort of meanderings of thought. So anyway, I want to thank you for being here. I know it's late for you. It's dinner time for me, so I'm going to sign off, and everybody, we'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye.